Hello, and welcome back to Radio Free Urbanism, a podcast about urbanism and stuff. I am joined by one of my co-hosts here. You know him, you love him, our in-house foamer, Ethan Myers.
Welcome back, everybody.
We also have somebody filling in for Alex Williams, somebody who I've definitely considered one of the most underrated urbanists on YouTube today, and that is Rachel Leonardo.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate you having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
Absolutely. So we're really excited to have you here. We've got lots of things to talk about. Actually, we only have a few things to talk about specifically, but I think they're going to, have some fruitful conversations. So I'm really excited about that. But before we really get into what's happening with Rachel and some of the stories we got some updates. At least I have one update, and this is something a little. It's not sad, but anyway, I was riding my bike the other day, and I was thinking, hey, I haven't crashed my bike in a long time.
Oh no!
And naturally, you know what happens.
Yep.
Oh
yep.
no!
Oh.
I was going real slow, a concrete road.
Even better.
Just out of nowhere, boom, happens like that. I'm on the ground. I've been sore for like a week. I've been a little scared to get back in the bike, but I did it and it was fine. But I am still really sore, like rolling into bed, just like feeling like a real old man. As if I'm not already. But anyway.
Oh, no.
It always happens that way, right?
Right? It's serendipitous. But anyway, first, before we get into our main story here that we have about Chuck Maroon and Strong Towns, we got to introduce our guest and ask her what's going on with Rachel and what is Studio Leonardo?
Yeah. So what's going on with Rachel? Let's think. Well, I guess I mainly run the channel Studio Leonardo, which, if you're unfamiliar, is one of the urbanist bunch of YouTubers, proudly making a little dent on the internet, talking about why it's important to consider building for people, and under the belief that our infrastructure does incentivize strong community. So, working with people that I connect with on the internet, as well as people that I meet in real life to try and tell these stories about spaces that are well designed and also pinpoint problems that need to be reconsidered and readdressed. So, that's kind of what my main focus is here on, this little corner of the internet, and happy to be joining and continuing to collaborate with others who do the same.
Awesome. So I'm just wondering how you originally got into this, because most of us, actually, I think most of us who are in the urbanist space, a lot of us are not, classically trained in any field that is directly related to urbanism. I guess everything is, but you know what I mean? We're not urban planners like we've talked about in the past. So can you tell us about your background? Yeah. and how you ended up.
You don't want me designing
YouTube
anything.
Videos? No, definitely
not. We'll see about that one. Maybe in the future. I'm originally from the US. I grew up outside of Washington, DC, and have always had a love for architecture. So I, went to school for that. I'm trained as an architect, although I'm not technically a practicing architect, because out here in Spain, I need to get my degree revalidated. So in finding that out, when I was coming out here to live and search for a lifestyle that was more suitable to the kind of walkability that I was looking for, I found myself looking for jobs that would offer me this creative flexibility to speak about something that I love, but also finding it a bit difficult to get that opportunity because of the fact that my degree is not considered legitimate here as of today. So I've always loved YouTube. If you speak to any of my friends back home, they'll tell you that I would talk their ear off walking down any city street about why the brick pattern on X building was just the coolest thing in the world, and why like certain traffic patterns were fascinating to me. And it kind of just fell into place that it made sense for me to start talking about it on YouTube, because in my day-to-day, I wasn't able to do it with my job. So that's kind of how all of this started. And I've been at it for just almost 2 years now. And it's been fantastic. I really can't complain. It's been a fun building process. And really am looking forward to the future of it as well, what it'll bring me.
That's awesome. So when you're
Exciting.
talking to people about this stuff, I'm wondering, what are the reactions you were getting? Because I want to see if we can relate in a certain way. So like, was it usually enthusiastic, or how'd that go?
A lot of it's like, it starts as like blank stares, like, okay, and then it kind of changes to like, oh, okay, like I guess that makes sense. Like I never really thought about it that way. And actually, what's been really cool, especially since starting the channel, is I have friends here now who will send me videos from other, either from your guys' channels or other people who are kind of just commenting on this, but maybe aren't necessarily fully in the niche, and saying like, wow, I never thought about, because I'm in Spain, I've never thought about the way that they designed like the Las Ramblas, which is like a large market hall in Barcelona, to accommodate people. Like that's a very wide street, but the way that they've been able to design it is predominantly multimodal, with only, I believe, 2 lanes for passing traffic, and that's predominantly used for their bus systems. So one on one side in one direction, and then the other obviously in the opposite direction. And you can actually see how a wide street is actually justified in some cases because of the amount of people that need to move through it, but not necessarily how they're moving through it. Like it's not about the car in this case, it's about trying to find the most efficient way for the people to get through that space. And so in this case, the street width is justified, right? Getting back into your question, they start to notice these things. Like they appreciate why a bench is placed in a park or along a walking road, every 20 feet or so, so that you can rest if necessary. So that's been really cool, and is also one of, I think, my drivers to continue to make videos, is watching people become more aware of the space that surrounds them and how it impacts the way that they're able to live their lives.
That's wicked, because I've had that kind of reaction sometimes, but often maybe it's just because I talk about it all the time at home. My wife is sick of it, and she's rolling her eyes at me like, "Oh my god, here we go again." But yeah, that's amazing. That's like everything you want when talking about this stuff, is for people to have an open, perspective, and being able to accept it and open their eyes to it, which is fantastic. That's amazing. So
Completely, yeah.
back to you moving from the States to Europe. How did you decide to do that, to go across the Atlantic?
Yeah, well, it's definitely been a point of conflict for me making content. But I came here originally in 2018 and lived in Germany. I was still studying at the time, and lived in a small city called Brunswick. Braunschweig also is what it's called. I don't know if just different pronunciations for different languages. Brunswick is much easier, so we'll stick with that. And when I moved, I was kind of concerned that I was going to be detached from the world, because it was a small town. I'd never heard of it before. I ended up going there, and let's just talk about their public transport for a second. I mean, amazing. Just trams, light rail throughout the city, really well connected to their main train station. You could literally get around anywhere in the country so easily. I didn't even think about driving a car, and that was my first experience really living in a place that was well suited to pedestrian access, and not even just their light rail, heavy rail, anything that was more mechanically constructed, train travel as well. Their bike lanes were so well protected, really well designed, and very well respected as well. The anybody that's riding a bike in Germany in a bike lane always has priority. Like it's a different standard than what I think we can see sometimes in North America, and even sometimes here in Spain, I'd say. So that was just really eye-opening to see in action things that I had an interest in going into school, and was really heavily influenced by a couple of professors as well back in the United States, to see everything actually take place, and like how we could potentially live, really was interesting to me, and fueled that passion for wanting to learn more. I ended up in Spain because I speak the language better than German, and I thought that would be easier. And yeah, ultimately that's what made me come out here. I took a master's program in project management to help me get here a little bit easier. And have stayed ever since, just because I've actually fallen in love with the culture of the people and how they utilize their space in different ways. So these kind of different experiences that I've been having abroad, are things that I've been grappling with as well, with trying to figure out, like, why did I do this, when I'm also very interested in trying to talk about and create better spaces for people that are from my home country and, North America in general. And I'm kind of finding that it's culturally there's a lot of differences, but there are certain aspects of the way that they design, not just the physical spaces, but the policies around it that help them to use these places a little bit more. And I think by having these experiences, I'm hoping that I can use my channel and start to leverage it to show people, anybody who's interested, how designing in certain places can have similar frameworks, but be applied in different ways. Especially in North America, I think we're babies in our construction processes, and what we can do in comparison to a lot of these European cities that have had a lot of history surrounded by them, that have influenced the way that they've grown. So those are kind of, I think I rambled there a little bit, but
that's okay.
Hopefully,
That was,
yeah.
I got taken on a journey, and I'm happy with it. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That's
I'm also
awesome.
open to your opinions and thoughts on that as well.
Well, I feel like I'd love to go into that conversation about, Europe and the way they've changed over, millennia. It's been, even in the past 100 years, you can look at Europe and the way that's
Totally.
changed, especially from all the wars that happened. But that is a conversation for like a whole podcast on its own, I feel like.
Completely.
Maybe we'll get into that one day. Yeah. But the thing that I'm most interested in, and it comes around the conversation of, the doomerism of, North America, it's done. They've messed it up so bad that it's beyond saving. And it's about the feet on the ground experience. When I've talked about my experience living here in Vancouver, and it's been very good for the most part, but as someone who lived, outside Washington, D.C., where's it, Arlington or somewhere around there? Or
In Kensington, Maryland. So kind of
Okay.
actually small town feel, but surrounded by a very metropolitan area. Development there has definitely seen, I think, what a lot of North America has seen. But they do have a historical society that has preserved the small strip that was the downtown area. It sits on the B&O Railroad as well. So there's a lot of these older buildings, Victorian style buildings, and mom and pop shops that have been able to survive. I think partially because of the historical district, and also to the credit of the businesses, their ability to continue to innovate and make sure that it's a place for the community to be.
That's really nice.
I just made a video on my channel about Baby Cat. Which is a bar that makes beer. I mean, obviously, but the way that they design their policies to allow families to be in that space has really ignited a movement in the community that I don't think they're even fully aware of. So I was trying to give more of a voice to what was happening and why they were so excited that a place like this existed. So that was really fun. I've been in contact with the town hall, the mayor, and a couple of their staff workers to just discuss the video. And it's been really cool. That was really fruitful.
I really enjoyed that video. It's Meet
thanks.
the Bar Pioneering American Pub Culture, I think is the title.
Yeah.
It was fantastic. And I want to talk about that a bit later, because we want to get into kind of those subjects that you talk about regularly. What I'm curious about is what's the main differences between your experience living in the USA versus living in Europe, and like the good and the bad? Like, what are the big differences you think?
Yeah. Sure. I mean, we'll start with the bad and then we can work to the good. In the US, I live very car centric. Even in college, I had I went to Virginia Tech. It was a very pedestrian centered campus, but even still, if you would go out at night, like you had to cross the main street, and you have college kids driving up and down that road, maybe not necessarily respecting the speed limit, while other college kids are walking around and under the influence. It's a bit scary, and like you would hear stories of people getting injured or worse.
Definitely.
Not often, but it's often enough that it's like this shouldn't happen, right? So in my opinion, that's kind of the biggest sore thumb that has always stuck out to me. But the good about that I've found living there is, I think if you're open to people, then they will be open back to you. You just have to be respectful of the fact that we all come from very different perspectives. But in many ways, I find that that's a good thing. Like, it is a melting pot. And maybe I'm also just speaking from a perspective of having lived in Washington, D.C., which was a very transient city, is a very transient city. So I had a lot of access to people who had come from different cultures, who spoke different languages, who had different perspectives on life and what is quote unquote normal, right? So, but I loved that. Like, that was a really integral part of my childhood that I wasn't aware of until I left. And I think that that's something that the US can use to its advantage if they're open to hearing how other people think, and we become more tolerant of differences that we may have at the very beginning, listen to what we each have to say, and hopefully can find some sort of a conclusion that would best suit everybody at the end of the day. So that's kind of, good and bad of the US, good and bad of Spain specifically. In Spain, in the area that I live in, the town is quite small and still closed off from most of the world. So the ideas, I think, here are not as open or as potentially innovative as they possibly could be. As they begin to open up more the country to immigration and different types of people, we will start to see that change for sure. But the dreams, like this American dream of living in a bigger house, having a private yard, is definitely seeping through in the way that they are building newer developments, even around the city that I live in now. And so that's been a little bit disheartening, because the good thing that the one thing that I'm obsessed with here is how much they love to get together and how much they appreciate having these open spaces around them in order to have these little parties and have very flexible rules around how to occupy plazas and parks. That's been really eye-opening for me, and is something that I'd love to dive into more, especially this summer as things start to pick back up again and people are outside more, to discuss why that we should approach designing open spaces to also be more flexible to the types of uses they can have.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's something I think is really missing in a lot of North American cities. Is those flexible? Yeah, the good third place that's very flexible. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing it. Yeah. Ethan, do you have any more questions before we get into the stories?
Yeah, Rachel, I don't know if my camera's lagging out or anything. It usually likes to do this around this point in the show. I'm sure my audio is still coming through, but Rachel, real quick question for you. So I'm not making assumptions, but you are a woman, correct?
Yeah. I am a woman. Yes.
I do not want to make assumptions, it's just, how has that impacted your, voice in the space? Because we all know that the urbanist space, generally, I've checked my statistics. I'm sure Nick has checked his statistics, that women in the urbanist space really just aren't as prevalent. And how has that impacted your videos, your voice, how you've been talking to the community's impact on you as well, too?
Sure. No, thanks for the question. Yeah. It's a great one. It's definitely something I've thought about. And yeah, like you said, checking the back end of things, I think 98% of the people who watch my content are male. And I'm open to that. Like I invite of course, anybody who's interested in these topics. But it's something that I definitely am curious about. How do we make things more interesting, let's say to a feminine audience, or people who maybe are drawn to different delivery, a different delivery of the same kind of content, right? Yeah, I don't have that fully figured out, but for me, I saw at this moment, so the way that I've recently heard it being described is like, if we're going to go with the car analogy here, which is ironic, but if the guy, if men in general are cars and women are riding motorcycles, again, this is very general. The car and the motorcycle can get to the same place at the same speed relatively, but the motorcyclist has to wear a little bit more protection in order to, make sure that if something is going to happen, that they also need to be a little bit more vigilant and ready to kind of react. So that's kind of like the way that I try to approach my channel, but I don't necessarily, or just even some of the conversations that I have. But I wouldn't say that it's like, I'm trying to find the words. I feel that it's we're going to get to the same destination. I think we all have good intentions. I think it is true that sometimes women or feminine people have to, and maybe I'm using the incorrect terminology, but they have to be aware that they need to be a little bit more agile, or know that they're going to be taking a few more hits than maybe some of their other colleagues in the space. And I'm aware. I'm okay with that. That's just who I am. My personality. I've never let anything like that get me down. Like I don't see that as and maybe in some cases it could be a disadvantage, but for me, it's something like, okay, it's just another hurdle, just like everything else. I think being able to be a prominent voice on the internet is already difficult in itself. So we're all kind of in the same boat. But the way that I hope that it's at least shaping my perspective, being who I am, is just to give another voice and a different idea to how spaces can be used from a female perspective. And I am interested in also hearing, and I guess more aware of how other people may feel in the space as well, especially if they are a minority, and how they potentially feel safe or unsafe in those areas, and how we can, spark a conversation that's genuine around finding reform for them.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome.
Thank you. Definitely great insight there.
Doesn't get talked about that much. A lot of writers talk about it in their books. Again, I think I talked about this a few weeks ago at this point, was there are no accidents, and Jesse Singer talks a lot about those differences and how it makes up the way we see, accidents in that perspective. But even other books often talk about urbanism too, and how we need to address that. So it's good to hear your perspective, and I'm really happy to hear the way that you deal with it, which is like, it fills me with inspiration to think.
Absolutely.
Seeing it just another hurdle that you have to take on. It's really cool.
Cool. No, I'm glad. Yeah, I actually just wanted to add one more thing on that as well. I had somebody comment on a video of mine as well, saying that third places for them feels inaccessible because they deal with, either they have autism, and loud noises really affect them. So finding third places that are maybe even smaller or a little bit off to the side where they could be a bit more private is a solution that they were saying is a good first step. That's not obviously the full answer to this, but that thinking and having those things in mind is really interesting. And so again, this is why I try to make content, is to have these conversations and to open up my channel, and especially the comments section, for different perspectives, so that people not only are only hearing my perspective in a video or my perspective consolidated from other people's works, but they're also free to discuss and share what they feel in the comment section. And so that's been really fruitful as well for me as a source of inspiration, to hear people's thoughts. We all have different perspectives and I think a lot to say. Mm-hmm. And it's all very, very valid and interesting.
Excellent.
Awesome. Absolutely.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what you have on those subjects in your future videos, because I know there's going to be lots of good fruit off that tree. So I think it's time to get into our first story here. This is one that I've added here, and this is about a popular subject, I think, but more importantly, as somebody who talks a lot in this space, and I think is starting to come off as a bit controversial to some people. But anyway, this is about Chuck Marohn from Strong Towns. He was on the Bike Talk podcast, a podcast that I'm a fan of. They talk about cycling and the ways that we move around our cities and making that safer. And they had a conversation, about a 45-minute conversation about, having empathy towards drivers. And if I could summarize this podcast as best as I can, it's from the perspective of Chuck. And if you're familiar with Charles Marohn, it's about a bottom-up approach where we come together as a community to help change. And he says, and this is the quote, I'm just quoting him here. He says, looking at your fellow humans as adversaries to be mocked at best and defeated and pounded to the ground at worst is just not a healthy way to live and not a healthy way to bring about change. And I think that sums up his position on the subject of having empathy for drivers. Now, before we really get into this, I want to talk a little bit about what he says in the podcast and some things that I kind of disagree with. He emphasized the amount of people that drive and the massive percentage of people that drive, right? And that we need to be less aggressive to them and appeal to those individual interests that they would have to get them on board with our message. But the things that kind of maybe rubbed me the wrong way is that he was very dismissive of the idea that large vehicles are responsible for the increasing death and destruction on our streets. Bigger and bigger SUVs. You've seen it since around 2010, right? The death rates are going up. And he seems allergic to the top-down solutions, very libertarian nature. And in this case, that we shouldn't rely on the government to regulate the size of vehicles, which in my opinion is kind of silly considering those top-down interventions led to this arms race in the first place with CAFE standards. But that aside, I think he makes a lot of really good points in that people are taking the choice that's given to them, right? Like if you're the only thing that you see around you to get around is a car, you're going to use a car, right? Driving is frustrating for these people because it gives them mixed messages. You're in an environment, long, wide, straight roads, gentle curves, go fast, but also stop signs, lights, all these other things that are telling you to slow down, giving you these mixed signals. And we need to fix that. So from that minor disagreement I have aside, what do you guys think about that? As when we are mocking drivers in a certain sense, as we talked about a few weeks ago on our podcast, we had a discussion about that and the whole fuck cars movement on Reddit or the War on Cars podcast. What do you guys think about this perspective? Should we give more empathy to drivers?
It's definitely
anybody want to take it?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting concept to give more empathy to drivers, considering they make up, I believe, it's probably 90+% of modal share in the U.S. outside of like New York City and like rural Alaska, and also probably Canada as well too. But the real thing is that, I mean, we're all just humans at the end of the day. I mean, Nick said this before, that we all are just people who want to go places. Like, this is really just a solution. We really just want to get from point A to point B safely. And in order to do that, belittling, people who drive is not exactly going to, help further the urbanist cause. I mean, if you want to, make cities better for driving or for, getting around other than driving, you're going to have to eventually, get rid of car infrastructure. But that doesn't mean that you have to belittle drivers for what they do.
Mm. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, you're talking about the fuck cars movement. I believe personally that we've got to find a balance, right? And if 90% of, if I'm quoting that correctly, of, vehicle usage is single use cars at the moment, there's an imbalance there. And what we're seeing in our society is people upset and frustrated with that. through the fact that the internet is a megaphone for their voices. People making memes about traffic and how that affects their daily lives, wanting to work from home because they want to avoid having that and take back those hours in their lives, right? Like, there's a reason that these conversations are being had without necessarily touching on the fact that the car is, in this case, the problem. And the people who are like what Ethan was saying, people who are driving these cars are doing it probably because it's what is most accessible to them. So I think we should have empathy for the person in the car. I think that at the same time that empathy should hopefully lend itself to a more open ear, and vice versa. The people who are probably more adamant about using the car and continuing to use the car at the levels of dependency that they have it should be more open to having the conversation of, what do you mean when you say you want to get rid of car infrastructure? And not in a condescending way, but in a place that's like more curious. What is the goal, right, of this? Big cities in the United States can definitely operate, and probably, this is a blanket statement, can pull the funds together to create better infrastructure for the citizens that live there now, given their economic standings, right? Again, blanket statement, but we should have empathy for people, but I don't necessarily think that we need to have empathy for a vehicle, right?
Yeah.
What a take right there. That's just a quote right from the podcast. That's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Oh my God. Yeah. That's
so.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
Yeah, I think you guys nailed it for sure. It's not about having empathy for cars. It's about having empathy for people. Yeah. And I think Charles Marone made some fantastic points about that. And it's something, again, we talked about a few weeks ago. But again, is this misplaced when we complain about this, when we make memes, when people put a long post about their frustration? Like, is that misplaced? Is that misplaced frustration? Or should we be allowed to vent?
I think we should be allowed to vent. I mean, I think that, idea sharing and like the human experience is a messy thing. And I that's why I'm like, I love the internet and what it's been able to offer us, because we're able to share our perspectives on things. Like, Chuck has a very valuable take on what it is to build strong communities. He's obviously been in this for a long time, but that doesn't necessarily mean that anybody else who has either recently found an interest in urbanism or urban planning, or, even niches inside of this kind of umbrella field, don't have a voice that's worth being heard as well. Again, people have different experiences, different perspectives. And I think if we're open and willing to listen to people and how they want to go about things, you mentioned that, should we be using policy and go top down to create cars that are smaller? And that's something that I personally think would be a fantastic idea. I also believe that not only when we design spaces that are mixed use and meant for people, that they are doing that, but that we should somehow incentivize policies on a local level, and maybe even state levels as well. I don't know fully on a national level at this point, but that these spaces should be used to celebrate the people who live there in some way. And that's just from my experience, having lived in Pamplona and having visited a bunch of different small towns across the north of Spain, where their town halls are very much invested in making sure that the people feel like they belong in the spaces that surround them. There's more to the urban conversation, I think, than just saying like, we got to get rid of cars, or it's always a deeper conversation. And the fact that there are so many people with different perspectives is necessary. Yeah. So I'm pro venting. Long story short.
Awesome. Yeah, I am too, naturally. Sorry, go ahead, Ethan.
Yeah, I would have to say I'm pro venting as well myself. I mean, if you follow my Instagram, or you followed me from the very beginning, you'll know that I am probably one of the biggest yappers and venters when it comes to urbanism in that case. But I really do think that kind of venting is a good critique. I mean, obviously it's a bit more radical than your standard well developed argument that you'll have over on a podcast or on a YouTube video. It kind of takes out all the nuance and kind of just goes straight for the edge in that case of the urbanist argument of like, yeah, cars do kind of suck in the urban space. We shouldn't have this. And of course, you take the nuance out of the conversation, you're obviously going to get people who don't know that there is nuance to a situation and will immediately clash back at that. But I mean, that's just kind of, a larger systemic problem when it comes to, short form content in the internet space when it comes to that. And I do agree venting is a great thing, but I mean, for some people, it just completely takes out all nuance. And then some people just don't get nuance in general and they just want short content that they can, just enjoy or, get angry at.
Yeah,
just
completely.
lap it up. I think it's a branding issue in some cases. And it's been that way with a lot of different movements. I don't want to get into specifics, but yeah, again, back to just when you say fuck cars, people are like, wait a minute. I have a car. I have to get to work. I got to go pick up my kids this afternoon. What do you mean? And it's not fuck cars. It's fuck car dependency, I think is, people have different opinions about that, but I think largely that is what the movement is. And
but I mean, fuck cars just hits harder, and that's why
it
people
does, right?
like it.
Yeah, you can't have this. Yeah,
you can't ignore that.
Completely. No, I mean, it's punchy, it's, that's what people want to hear. I think the negativity of it is always so much easier to find, right? Like that's human nature is to go to the negative. And I don't think that's, I think it has its place for sure. But I think if we're not willing to take that energy, because that's very strong energy, if we're not able to figure out how to reorient it, to take action or to change the conversation around like, look at this problem, to, okay, this is a problem, but it also is an opportunity, right? And like finding ways to change that narrative slightly. Like, okay, if it is fuck cars, but it is fuck car dependency, like what creative ways can we get people to start to think of that conversation differently? And I think that's where our work lies personally, is being online and having passionate about this in our daily lives and wanting to share that with the world is very special. And we are all in a position where there are people who are active in commenting and probably even taking part in their local governments, maybe in part because of what we do, but also on their own. And if we can continue to find clever ways to make this content seem as interesting to them as it is to us, then that's when we start to move the needle around making change in the spaces that we want to see.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we're seeing. I think we've talked about this on this podcast before about advocacy versus, actual action, or just the YouTuber space and urbanism versus actual things happening on the ground. But again, I personally think that's happening. I'm seeing it right here in my city, and I'm seeing it in other cities every day on the internet. So that's good.
I know Reese from, RM Transit. He was talking about this in one of his videos. And he was mentioning the point, and I do agree with him on this, that, urbanism has gotten to a point where people just can talk about it in normal conversation. And some people will actually know what you're talking about before you even explain it to them. And I think that's a real change that, has just been pushing it over, because exposure in this space has really been something that's very limited. I mean, you look at accounts across, the whole like urbanist community, there are very few that have cracked 1 million that talk about urbanism content or anything like that. And very few that have even gotten on this. So the urbanist community is still, the new like online urbanist community is still very, very young and still growing in the space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Completely. Yeah.
Absolutely right. All right. Well, let's move on to our next subject we have here. This is coming from Rachel. So you want to lead this one?
Yeah, for sure. No, this is something that I have been interested in for a while, I'll say. It's the idea that we need to redefine what convenience means. Coming abroad, being an American, a North American abroad, is interesting because it pegs you for a lot of the stereotypes that people may have around how we decide to live our lives. Land of convenience, right? And I really thought about that. What does that mean, right? Is it being able to have access to a car, a private lot, a private garden, backyard, and being able to drive to wherever you want to go? And from being here, I found that maybe it's not that, right? Like for me, I'm able to leave my apartment, be in the city center within 5 minutes, and I have all of the convenience and amenities that I need at my side, all on foot. To the point where if I don't know what to do during the day, I know that I can go outside and there will probably be somebody in the street playing music, or even events put on by the government, the local government here, incentivizing certain activist groups or different holidays, student organizations doing things in the street that help to bring life to the city. So my thought is that what is convenience really, right? Like I'd like to get your take on this. Is what is the idea that has brought convenience to probably what it is recognized as in the United States? And is that something that you agree with, or is there a way for us to move the definition or redefine the definition of convenience to something else? And what do you feel that should be?
Oh boy. Well, I think it's more complicated than simply, hey, this is convenience or that's convenience or not, right? Because it's the whole system that's changing for you to get to that place. And the clear differences are often, when you look at car dependent America, when you're in, again, I'm always going to come back to Houston, because when I think of like the most car dependent place, that's what I'm going to think about. It's like the government is moving to make the roads wider so that you can get to that thing that you need faster and more easily, right? But obviously my perspective is that's not convenient to me. Having to get in my car is not going to be convenient to me. And all the times that I live in a brilliant, very walkable place for North American standards, which I absolutely love. But going overseas, having visited Europe several times and being in Asia recently, to see that kind of convenience, like real convenience, like to me, convenience is a Japanese convenience store. The Japanese convenience store has almost everything you need to survive. And they're on almost every corner where you can walk outside your house. There you go. You can get lunch. You can get dinner. You pay your bills. You can go to the ATM. Everything's there. And in that sense, that's convenience. But to think of the idea that you can get your entertainment out of your local space by just walking outside your door, that's a thing I haven't really thought about. And that's kind of novel to me. I really like that. I don't know, Ethan, what do you think about this?
Yeah, no, I mean, in America, really, we are the land of the car at the moment. Well, I mean, at least suburban America is. But one thing, yeah, that's kind of based around the whole idea of convenience is you have, the drive-through, that was built around the convenience of the car. And I mean, everything is basically in the suburbs of the US, or at least a vast majority of them, is convenience dedicated to the car. And I don't think you'll see anything quite more physically imposing of that convenience as the chain known as Buc-ee's. I don't know if you two are familiar with this chain. Rachel, I saw the smile. For those who don't know, Buc-ee's is a gas station chain based out of Texas. And they are no ordinary gas station chain. They are a gas station that is the size of like a small Walmart. And they have over 100 pumps at their gas stations. And when you go in there, you have it's like the full automotive convenience. Gas is cheaper there. You go inside the store, it's got literally everything that you could get for, like, say, actually, you know what? Just literally anything you can get. You want that live, laugh, love sign for your home? It's there. You want a 64-ounce Dr. Pepper? It's there. The cleanest bathrooms in the U.S., it's there. And this is not a Buc-ee's commercial, okay? I'm just saying that if you're talking about true automotive freedom, that is the place. But for most people, if you don't have a car, if you're not making car payments, you can't get there. It's just inaccessible. So how is that convenient to anyone? Now, you look at a city like, say, New York City, and you have what I personally think of as the most convenient place in the US. The corner store or the bodega is like infinitely more convenient than any Buc-ee's could ever be. It's mostly based around, quick eats, convenience, items. It's not quite as in depth as like the Japanese, a convenience store, but it's quite literally the New York version of it, I would say. And it is, it's wonderful. I mean, the corner store really is kind of the cornerstone of good urbanism and convenience. But yeah, that there, Nick, is Buc-ee's.
So for those of you who are looking on YouTube, this is insane. This looks like a caricature of a gas station. I've never seen
this. Yeah. The gas station is literally longer than the store itself. The store looks like it's pretty big.
It looks like it's photoshopped, like the carport over top of the gas pump.
It's just been extruded forever.
Yeah.
It looks like it's photoshopped, but I can tell you right now that is totally real.
Oh, here, this one.
Yeah. Wow. Look at you. This one's got double the fun over here, double the extrusion.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Texas. That's for
Nick,
sure.
you've got to make the pilgrimage. You gotta. I'm just saying, it's
make the pilgrimage.
It is peak car dependent infrastructure at its best. And if you know anything about me, I hate car dependent infrastructure. But man,
it's
a place.
It's a place. Yeah. Oh my God. I thought Fry's was like the pinnacle of chains in the United States that sadly closed down, but maybe this is the one that needs to. My God, it's incredible.
Yeah. Quite the eye opener. Yeah. No, I mean, to me, I think it's interesting that you're mentioning physical places and very much so in this field. I think it's extremely important for us to understand how the infrastructure that we're building is going to cater towards the people that live in these communities. But I was actually mentioning to Nick previously, I'm actually seeing infrastructure go up here in Spain that is well developed. Like it has a bar underneath, a 5-story condominium, and they aren't designing the rest of the space to engage with the rest of the street level. People have these private gardens now. In front of the bars are parking lots, not full parking lots, but just strips of parking that completely cut off what used to be access to kids' playgrounds, and for parents to then sit and have a beer while watching their kids play, because they deserve to relax and have fun just as much as their children do. That now is not existing in a lot of the newer urban developments that are being built up, at least in the part of Spain that I live in. And that has me kind of concerned, because to me, I also see that for them, convenience is being defined as these luxury apartments, easy access to the cars, and private gardens. Not to say that these are bad things to desire, but I think that there's a place for them. And what I've been seeing as well is, as Pamplona becomes a bigger city, there aren't places for people to go that they want to go to, where they feel like there's a good, environment or vibe at the end of the day. And so they're flooding to the center of the city where I live, which is quite small. And all of the bars can't necessarily hold the amount of people that are now coming into this area. There's a lot of demand, which is, of course, it's a good thing. But at the same time, if there are going to be people full cities, essentially, of neighborhoods that are all coming into this one area, then wealth isn't necessarily being distributed across the whole city. We're not necessarily designing spaces to accommodate people, and we continue to design them to accommodate the car. So I think convenience, reorienting it around people, is a really interesting concept, because it's how can we engage the base level of the street level of any city where the building reaches the street, to make sure that the people are getting the full benefit of whatever they need to access there, not just can we fit a parking spot here because people want to have access to their car.
Yeah, I think that's like right on the nose. At the end of the podcast, we have a little blurb we say, and Alex says feet first, which is to say pedestrians should be the number one priority, and not just when we're talking about transportation and moving around our city, but also the way we design it, right? And I think this goes right into that, which is great. And I was saying before the podcast, I am rereading Jane Jacobs' The Death and Life of Great American Cities, and in one chapter she talks extensively about the projects in New York and talking about how the people who live there hate them. These people come in, they build these beautiful new projects with these lovely, lush green spaces in the middle, and they hate them. And it's why? There's no community. It's just a building with like a lawn. There's nothing there. Completely. It's not convenient, right? They have nothing there to support an actual community. And that's the thing we need to really take care of when we're making these spaces. And again, like we were saying before the podcast, I was talking about where I live now versus other places in Vancouver that are up and coming, as they say. The same thing. Beautiful new developments. It's by a river, completely not mixed use at all. Nothing. It's just all construction for residences, and then one single district for business. It's classic zoning in the real sense, which is not what we want to keep doing.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ethan. Sorry.
No, you, Rachel.
I was just going to say, like, I this will be short. I think that the reasoning, of course, for building homes before commercial infrastructure is because they can fill homes to then gauge the amount of commercial infrastructure they need. And I understand that may be like a phase 1, phase 2 kind of a project, but there needs to be better engagement with the people in the communities that are deciding to move there. Like, if you decide to move to one of these newer developments, you need to be given some sort of a pamphlet, shown where the community's meeting every week to start making decisions around what commercial activities could potentially be filling the spaces underneath you. And they need to be given more of a say, I would think, into how the spaces around them are being developed to better suit the lifestyles of the people who are probably thinking about spending more than 5, 10, 20 years there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's going to come back to the whole thing about incremental development. And it's not like you can just, boom, community made. But I mean, I have a question for you later. I really want to get into that. But Ethan, do you have anything else to say on this topic?
No, not anymore.
Shut down. It's over. Okay. Well, we've got a few
I'm so
questions.
Sorry.
No, you're
Rachel.
all good. I just completely lost what I was going to say for earlier. So,
Should we do listener mail first, or the few questions we got here? What do you think, Ethan?
I think you should decide, Nick.
He's just you. Okay.
No, you.
I'm following the page here. Anyway, the first one we got for Rachel here is, what do you like? Where do you find inspiration for your videos?
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, definitely the comment section, whether they're ones that are more gripey and disagree with what I have to say, which I'm always open to. Like, I'm not necessarily hurt or offended by people who have a different opinion to me. It actually sparks some, interesting inner dialogue, I think. And my inner dialogue, I would say, is quite strong. It's always there, always thinking. So when I find comments that are like that, or if I'm out in life, and I run into places like I did Baby Cat, and I just see that people are happier there. There's just a more electric energy. Those are things that inspire me to want to share those kinds of stories. But yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it's just like innately, I've always been a talker, and for better, for worse. And I've always loved talking about architecture and infrastructure. And so those were kind of the biggest drivers for me to get started with the channel. And what keeps me going is continuing to have conversations with people who experience space on a day-to-day basis and are interested in at least engaging me with the finite time that they have to have these kinds of discussions as well.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
I mean, I know Ethan and I both had that experience of responding to comments, which it just makes good content, I think, a lot of the time. But we're familiar with like that hard work that it takes to create videos. It's a lot, and it's not just the filming and editing, but it's a lot of it for me, especially, is the research along the way. So I want to ask you, what
Sure.
have you learned from creating content online, and how has that influenced other parts of your life?
Yeah, well, in terms of the influence on my life, it's definitely opened up a whole new world and a lot of different connections, which I'm super, super happy to have. And at the heart of it, that's really what I'm looking for, because besides the channels and what we're trying to build online, the human connections that we're creating, and I think the cumulative knowledge that we're sharing and get to receive from one another is what matters most. That's what's going to start to make a difference, I think, culturally and in our physical spaces. So that's been really humbling and also very cool to be a part of up until now. Only, 2 years in, so I can't even imagine where it will continue to go. And I'm sorry, the beginning of the question, I totally just lost the train of thought there.
What? No, that I think that kind of covers it. It's about what you've learned. What
Sure.
have you learned anything in particular?
Yeah. I think in terms of how we design our spaces is what we touched on a bit earlier, is how do we bring in more of the cultural elements into our physical space and into the way that we design infrastructure, right? Like if we're designing a plaza for San Francisco, for example, or like downtown San Francisco versus a small town in Oklahoma, what do those plazas need to have in them, or how can we even design policy around that would incentivize the use of those spaces, that makes the people from those areas feel proud to use them, right? Like taking it that level further, I think also helps to incentivize other voices in taking part in this kind of conversation.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So leading off that, the human experience, you're off, like all your videos, most of them focus on that human experience. And the ones that come to mind are, is it the urban planning can fix our loneliness epidemic? I think that was one of your popular ones, solving suburbia's quality of life problem. Again, that one about third places, the bar, American pub culture. And I think the most important one that I want to focus on was the missing conversation in urban planning. So what do you think new walkable and transit-friendly developments in North America get wrong, and what can be done differently to help build a real community?
Fantastic question. I'm able to give an umbrella answer because that's where we're coming at today. But at the end of the day, I do think that this comes down to details and knowing that if from the side of an urban planner or a developer or an architect, that you are a student when you come to design for the spaces of the town or community that you've been asked to design for. Even if you are considered a local to that area, I think you need to do the dirty work of speaking to the people who are probably in and out of the space that you are going to be redeveloping on a day-to-day to better understand what the needs are that you then have to service for those spaces. So that being said, I think generally speaking, instead of designing spaces that are mixed use and maybe full of the same box store or similar food chain options that typically occupy some of these newer developments, that we should consider, are there people in this community who are looking to open a restaurant, who have the dream of starting a clothing store? Or is this, let's take the garment district in New York City. If they were to redevelop that area, I only say that just because it's an example I feel comfortable speaking on, right? If in the garment district, they want to highlight or continue to highlight the history of what the garment district has meant to New York, there are probably plenty of people who live around or work in that area that know more about fashion and clothing and textiles than you or I will ever know. Is there some sort of a business that we can then help them build, right? A very famous saying in architecture is that form follows function. And although I'm not necessarily I don't fully believe in that. I do think that when we build out our spaces, that there are ways that we can better cater towards building spaces for the garment district in this case. Very exciting over here. My little thumbs up. But like, these kinds of things are really, I mean, the internet speaks, right? I think that that's what we need to be aware of is, as designers of any space, we are servants to the space that we are designing for, and therefore the community that we are designing for. And you need to take that job very seriously in order to best reflect what the community in them needs.
Right. And I think it definitely leans into that whole subject, as you were talking about new developments in Pamplona and how they're not quite filling that quota. So like, how do you reconcile with that? Because to build a new development is to simply say, like, could this ever really have a community off the bat? Or is that something that's just going to take, a generation or half a generation, some amount of time to actually happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can go both ways, right? There's definitely, I would say, given Pamplona's history, Spain's history of culturally embedded festivals and parties from various, or even just traditional celebrations that have to do with certain holidays that they have here. It's very much embedded in the culture. And although they are experiencing the same kinds of problems with loneliness, it's not necessarily at the same levels that we are familiar with it in the United States, because I think that they have infrastructure that doesn't exacerbate that problem. And also they have this foundation of like, these celebrations are things that we need to have. So in these new developments, there are town halls and things that are thinking about what day of the year are we going to celebrate the town? Like, what's the day of the town? And everybody who lives in the town gets a day off, and we're just going to have a parade, and people can drink in the streets, have a meal, some sort of a communal dish is shared. These things are just embedded in the way that the culture is here. So it will be a lot easier for them because there's less of a learning curve to get that, to make sure that that happens. I think culture is something that does enrich itself over time, of course, because there are layers to that historically, right? It's probably why Pamplona is known for the running of the bulls, for example. That's not necessarily by accident. Hemingway had a big part of making this a really well-known city in Spain. But bull running was, in some towns, is still a popular event that happens throughout the country. So I think it's just, I'm trying to get back to my point now. I don't want to, I just feel I typically end up doing this. But culture can be both fabricated at the beginning. I think it can be incentivized in saying like, okay, we're building this new development. How do we should celebrate the fact that this town is being developed, right? Like, let's look at Tempe, Arizona, and what cul-de-sac is doing. The day that they opened and inaugurated should be a day that is celebrated annually, because that is a big feat for them to have developed a non-car centric space in Arizona. I'm one of the first, if not the first in Arizona, right? That should be celebrated. Right. Completely car free. Is it not the first in the US? I know that there's some developments in Florida.
They call it like the first modern car free development.
Okay.
It's kind of a general term that they like have to use, but it's still a revolutionary development regardless. And yeah, I do kind of agree with you on that they should be doing some sort of celebration around, their original opening.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about like, and that should be annual, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like we're celebrating because it's like the first ever car free development. It could just be like, we're celebrating life. We're celebrating the people that have chosen to live here, the businesses that have chosen to begin here. And as the years go on, it's just a celebration of the history of what this town has been through. And I think people should be invited or allowed to come and see these kinds of events. Different types of cultural activities will start to flourish because innately humans share ideas and we have different ways of wanting to celebrate. So weird quirks and traditions will develop over time. That's what builds culture. And through that, people will say, oh, I want this. I want this for where I live. And then they'll start to understand, oh, okay, I get that the way that this place was built has impacted the fact that they've been able to do this. Like, what can I do to make my space feel similar where I live? Because I want to live in Montana, close to the mountains, not in the Arizona heat. But what can my small town do to have these kinds of similar events? And I really think that we undervalue the importance of celebration in that conversation.
Yeah, I think it kind of gets lost in a way because so much of our celebrations are national. All of our holidays, for the most part in North America, so many of them are nationalized, and there's sometimes a lack of local celebration that I think can bring people together. Like I think about growing up on the East Coast and having some of those in a certain way. Like my family is originally from a town called Harrow, which is probably about 45 minutes from Detroit. It's in Canada. But they have the Harrow Fair. And I know a lot of places have fairs, but it's a very small town. It's like 3,000 people, but the fair was massive. Everybody was there every day. And it was that one thing every year that this town had that was better than any other fair in any other bigger town in the whole area. And that's something as simple as that, I feel like can really bring people together.
Completely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think if we can find ways to make that permanent, right? Like the reason that I believe that it's a big thing here is, the buildings, the monuments that you see that are even sometimes dedicated to these festivals, they're permanent. They're not leaving. Like a fair is put up and taken down, and it's a fantastic first step. And that's exactly what we need to be shooting for. But finding ways to start to make it permanent is going to make people feel proud of being in these spaces again, I think.
Yeah. Excellent. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Ethan, do you have anything else to ask before we get to the listener mail?
No, I think we should get into the listener mail. I think that'd be a great thing that we can go into. It's a wonderful question today, and it's from one of our wonderful listeners and guest on the show, Jen Hall. And their question was, traffic calming is a great method to improve safety. What are your favorite traffic calming designs?
My favorite are natural ones that aren't explicit. Like, again, I've talked about this, at this point, the video should be out already, but about Japanese streets. And that is the fact that just the way that they're designed slows down traffic. They have narrow streets. It's very complex with people. There's no sidewalks. So there's people walking in the street. There's cyclists. There's stuff happening constantly, which slows down the traffic. And that's my favorite.
Yeah, completely. I think go ahead, Ethan. You should tell yours. I'm a yapper, so
yeah, we'll let you go next, Rachel, and you can yap about your favorite. But my favorites personally, I love when streets can kind of include natural features. Really kind of include that plant life, and that's really where I really appreciate chicanes. They're kind of these for listeners who don't know, chicanes are kind of these bump outs that you'll see in streets. And they're essentially, they can be like natural. A lot of the times they'll use like plants based around like a concrete curb. And these will, force drivers to make turns and, kind of veer out of the way of them, narrow the street down, and force drivers to slow down and pay more attention to the road or street that they're on.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth and probably said it much more eloquently than I did. Yeah, chicanes are great. It's also quite an easy solution up front. I don't think that you need to have a lot of investment to get that done, and they're quite effective. But I guess I'll also add in another way that we can have street calming and that's through like tactile grounds or changing the roads to be more multimodal as well, and giving priority to other types of transportation to make sure that the street is predominantly pedestrian focused, bike centric, and even some light rail there in that case, so that cars know that they're going through an area. That you cannot speed through.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot that can work. It's just too bad that a lot of it isn't being put in place. But as far as like a traditional North American style, if I could talk about it just briefly, is the humps. Not like a hump, but like a raised crossing. I loved raised crossings, and there's so few and far between here. I saw quite a few of them in San Francisco last time I was there. They seem to be becoming more popular there, but I feel like those are just fantastic. Not because it just slows traffic down, because it's basically a speed bump, right? But the fact that it now turns a sidewalk into a continuous sidewalk. You're not going from a pedestrian space into a car space. The car space has to cross the pedestrian space, and there's warnings for that. And I think that's what we should be doing in a lot of places in North America.
Another very simple one as well too that I'm a big fan of: bulb outs. Not huge infrastructure changes. You just push the curb further out, narrow the street a little bit at the intersection, and make it safer for the pedestrian to cross.
Some daylighting, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, completely.
All right.
Permanent daylighting.
Yeah. Anything else we should talk about here on the podcast? Okay. Well, I think we're getting long in the tooth here. So for Rachel, are there any exciting projects or initiatives you're currently working on you want to share?
I'm actually working through a bit more of experimentation. I'm excited. I'm gonna be coming out with some different content than what you probably are used to seeing, focused around the things that we spoke about today, but incorporating more of the architecture background that we briefly touched on here. So, looking forward to doing that over the next, let's say 4 episodes or so, and yeah, just continuing to be active in all the internet, social media spaces, commenting on people's stuff. So, and always open to people's DMs and messages as well. I'm always looking to speak to new people and get a new perspective. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, on that note, how can listeners and other content creators find your work and follow you?
Yeah, I'm Studio Leonardo on YouTube and all other platforms, although the O in some cases is a 0, just because of, the way that social media works. So, but Studio Leonardo, studio.leonardo, you can find me on YouTube, Instagram, Threads, Facebook, all of the above.
Awesome. All right. Well, Ethan, Sweet. Where can the lovely people find you?
Folks, you can find me at Climate in Transit on pretty much every social media except for Twitter. You can find me there at Climate Transit. And Nick, where can we find you?
I'm at Nick Laporte on YouTube, or Nick the Door in most social places. Alex Williams, who's not here with us today, is at Humane Cities. And if you want to email the show, it's at radiofreeurbanism@gmail.com, or leave a comment on the YouTube videos, and we'll surely get to it in the future podcast. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Rachel. I really appreciate you spending your time here today. It's been a pleasure talking to you and learning about
Rachel. It's been great.
Yeah. So with that, 2 wheels good.
And train good and car bad, folks.